Great to see you, Gary. Good morning.
Good morning. Always my pleasure.
Indeed. Gary, just before we dive into our subject matter this morning, I must ask your experience, election 2025, if you could sum it up in a couple words.
A couple of words. The country is not yet ready, and I don't think ever would be ready for third parties. It's as simple as that. It wasn't a case of that the third parties didn't have the type of persons, the quality of individuals. It wasn't about that at all. It had to do specifically with the country is a two-party country. I mean, you could recall even Kamala Persad-Bissessar, when she went up for a third party, I think she lost her deposit in 1991. That's just how it is. That we need to admit and to the fact that as much as people love another option, it just does not happen. I walked the length and breadth from Diego Martin all the way to Arima with my candidates from Point Fortin to Chabonas East. Everybody loves Gary. Everybody loves the NT. Everybody loves the Patriotic Front. They love third parties, but they are not going to vote for a third party. There's that fear factor as well, where the PNM supporters, the 338,000 odd, they will either not vote and protest or would stick with their party. Likewise, because of the fear that the other party will win, and vice versa, because of what you call this vote splitting. So that is how it is, and I provided the option, the NT, we provided the option, and the country said, no, we prefer to stick with our two parties, and that is the right of the citizens. They're the ones that make the decision.
Any regrets, Gary, not joining up with the coalition of interest? Because I'm sure you would have been this morning, going to some particular ministry. I would imagine with your expertise, it would have definitely been in the same national security that's now split in two, which would have been one of your ideas, from what I understand anyway. Any regrets at all not joining up? Because I'm sure you would have been in the mix, Gary.
Well, no, remember, it's possible, it's possible, but that decision was based specifically not on myself, but that of the other party, the UNC, decided that they did not want to work with the NT. And that is their right, for whatever reason. They made that decision. You got to hand it to them. I personally never thought that the UNC, they would have won. The UNC never won an election on its own when third parties are involved in 37 years. And the UNC did win this election on their own. There was no coalition per se. It was a UNC win. The other parties, in fact, some of them might have caused the UNC to have lost some support, which is why some of them would have been silent throughout the campaign. So it was a UNC victory. In 2010, it started off as a coalition because you'd have seen many COP candidates in strategic, even safe seats or marginal seats. This one was a strict, total UNC victory. Yeah. And that is a first. But it says a lot about the country. They believe that our country is just blinded by just blindly voting for who they wanted. It didn't happen this time around. It showed that the country was prepared to make a drastic change, and it is hoped that this government would move forward and do exactly what it is the country has asked for. I mean, I kept saying it throughout the campaign, the PNM, yes, it was the worst government the country has ever seen, but what we were doing is offering a choice between the UNC and other parties, and the country demanded emphatically that they want the UNC.
Yeah. Gary, I know that obviously lots of your ideas are no secret. It was part of the news cycle. You suggested that a couple of your talking points and policy positions would have been adopted. And I'm seeing that one where at least we're seeing the breaking up of what we know to be the National Security Ministry. It's now it's twofold, Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Homeland Security. Could you explain to us in detail the difference really between the two?
Yeah, sure. And this is just to clarify, this is not Gary Griffith demanding that, hey, I own this. I was just, prior to 2010, I was working closely with Kamala Persad-Bissessar in drafting policies for the 2010 election campaign. So she has mentioned these things since the 2010 election campaign. She did it again in 2015, I think 2020. I kept updating it when I became security advisor, security minister. It was immense research that myself and others that worked with me did to package it. So let us not knock what you're hearing here. The concept of it, the reason I said that was, and I went after this research, was you're speaking about a ministry with over 20,000 law enforcement officials, over 10,000 odd civilians, dealing with your most fundamental right to live, dealing with terrorism, dealing with gender-based violence, dealing with cybercrime, dealing with situations of rogue police officers, dealing with trying to improve the standard and quality of our law enforcement, training, equipment, motivation. You can't do it with one thing called a Ministry of National Security. It just does not work. And then when I did due diligence, I did research worldwide. That is where I was able to draft this. And so the only difference, and again, but it is the Prime Minister's decision, the only difference is that it was supposed to be the Ministry of Home Affairs, not the Ministry of Homeland Security, because Homeland Security really and truly is a U.S. term. So somebody probably spoke to and said, hey, let's change it to Homeland Security. I am concerned that it can cause some degree of confusion internationally, because Homeland Security in the United States really and truly has to do with terrorists, to deal with terrorist activities, to deal with customs, immigration, border protection, which by and large is what the Ministry of Defense is here. So people must not see it being duplicated. That's why it is, when I drafted it, it was referred to as the Ministry of Home Affairs, similar to what India has. They have a Ministry of Home Affairs. I think Guyana has a Ministry of Home Affairs. The United Kingdom has a Ministry of Home Office. So I was able to draft it under Home Affairs and the Ministry of Defense. The Home Affairs has to do specifically with the same thing as the other Commonwealth countries, dealing with internal law enforcement, policing, hard targeting, deterrence, and other arms in local internal law enforcement to provide the safety and security of citizens internally, when it involves the other units such as the Trinidad and Tobago Fire Service, the cadets, the E999 system.
Coast Guard also there? Coast Guard under?
That complement and work hand in hand.
Would you say Coast Guard would also be under Homeland?
And this is where it is. No, this is where it is. And I didn't complete my homework. So this is where there's going to be some degree of confusion that has to be clarified, because the Coast Guard is ready to deal with the Ministry of Defense. So the Ministry of Defense, when I drafted it, that involved the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force dealing with border protection, the security for the customs, the immigration. In fact, the recommendation I made was for customs to be removed from the Ministry of Finance. It was a very foolish concept for the last few decades, because ministers of finance foolishly said, well, customs is a revenue generator, so let's put customs there. No, customs plays an integral part to law enforcement and to national security. So it is good that customs must come under the Ministry of Defense. So the Ministry of Defense now will involve the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, with the Army being involved in border patrol, the customs, the immigration. Coast Guard now will also be part of it. But some of the hiccups that I picked up is like things such as the SSA. The SSA, where you're going to put SSA? Is it going to be under the Ministry of Home Affairs? Because it has to do with intelligence gathering for internal security, but the SSA also has a fundamental part to play in intelligence gathering to protect us from terrorist activities and so forth. Likewise, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Marine Branch, even though it's an arm of the police service, they will be involved more so in the Ministry of Defense work by dealing with border protection. I also recommended the concept of a border protection unit, because 95% of our illegal weapons come through our legal ports of entry, which shows we have a serious issue. The police could seize 500 firearms per annum. That's 5,000 in 10 years. But in one night, a container could leave our port. Several containers go missing annually. And that is the biggest problem. We lock down our borders, and that is why it is the concept of the Ministry of Defense came about. Another thing has to do with the prisons. The prisons is supposed to be moved from on that list to be moved and back under the Ministry of Justice, which I also drafted. Unfortunately, the ministers in the People's Partnership Administration did not move forward with the role and function of the Ministry of Justice as it should. I may hear people criticize the Ministry of Justice. That is going to be a critical arm to deal with the revamp of our flawed criminal justice system. That involves the improvement of rehabilitation, the reduction of recidivism, finding avenues to ensure that that police officers are not absent from court, finding ways to have a better system where persons can be in remand for 10 years for a sentence, and the maximum is 5 or 6 years. That was the focus of the Ministry of Justice. It was not done then because the persons who took over did not read what it is that I drafted. So if it is, we put these things in place, and you'll see certain other units.
Gary, I think we lost the audio. Let's try to get him back. Now, what I want to ask Gary, for hearing me, with the newly installed ministers, Minister Sturge, our Minister of Defense, and of course the Minister of Homeland Security, Minister Alexander, also in collaboration with the Ministry of Justice, do you think this three-pronged approach, Gary, could indeed bring the required results, because again, the mandate is to reduce crime within 6 months. The top cop says it is possible. Do you have confidence in the personalities who are in charge of these ministries to bring about the much needed change?
Hey, listen, the only way we could go is up. I think the worst minister in any ministry in the history of Trinidad and Tobago was Fitzgerald Hines. I mean, people continue to blame Dr. Rowley and Stuart Young, whatever. But people were very comfortable pre-2021. Crime became the number 4 concern behind health, education, and the economy. Fitzgerald Hines went out of his way to shut down and dismantle almost every single thing that was put in place to assist in people feeling safe. So anytime people try to question the capability of the other individuals, they may not be like Minister Sturge. She may not be an expert to understand that concept of the Ministry of Defense, where the focus of that ministry is the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. The Defense Force has been trivialized, ignored, not provided with what is required, and have been underutilized for the last 10 years. There's still the perception that you're waiting for a war to happen. The defense, so you're talking about 5,000 trained persons who are qualified to support and complement the police service and border security. If it is that we can utilize, Minister Sturge, if he has the right people around him, he doesn't need to be an expert in the defense force, but it all has to do with leadership. I worked with Roger Alexander. I actually appointed him to lead my most elite unit that put an end to kidnapping, it put an end to home invasion, it put an end to extortion. That was the Special Operation Response Team, which was also foolishly shut down by persons who replaced me based on possible instructions by people who seemed to be concerned that I was reducing crime. So if it is, so it's not about the individuals may not have the full expertise of leadership of a high level in national security, but if it is that they work around certain persons who can guide them accordingly, to that concept of the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Defense, and Ministry of Home Affairs or Homeland Security, whatever they call it, they will work in tandem with each other. And I'll just give you a quick example as well. The shutting down of the Energy Sector Security Initiative and the National Security Alert State, which I drafted in as a minister. Had that still been there, the Paria disaster may not have taken place. We continue to criticize the civilians for not pressing the button. A civilian nowhere is trained, qualified, or has the capability to make a decision for an operation. If it is that the National Operations Center, all of these things that were shut down by the PNM, had they been operational, there would have been someone who will be able to analyze the situation and press that button to say, this is what we need to do, we need to move.
Gary,
everyone sat down and twiddled their thumbs waiting on the politicians to make a decision.
Gary, could I ask you before we wrap things up, part of the campaign promise with Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar was the stand your ground law, the ability now for citizens, homeowners, anyone who is, obviously I would imagine there must be some kind of qualification process, but the rights to bear arm, the famous statement she said, load up the matic, empty the clip and knock it on them again and again and again, lyrics of a Trinidad song from the late K. Lion. Is that policy, is that particular plan going to help? You think if they really roll that out, that will bring some sort of ease to the crime situation in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, firstly, she was a good politician. That line and those comments put a lot of confidence and hope to the 95+% people who said, hey, yeah, that's what I want to hear. I want to have a gun. So it was able to get votes. Realistically now, I am confident, 100% sure, this is not about you could just go and get a firearm as easy as getting doubles on a Saturday morning anywhere in Trinidad and Tobago. That is not what is going to happen. The same way I said that Stuart Young was a very good Minister of National Security, Kamala Persad-Bissessar was an excellent chair of the National Security Council. She didn't know the difference between a water gun and a Glock, but she had the leadership skill to know how to direct, to delegate, and to understand. You cannot go ahead and be willy-nilly to give everyone a firearm. So that is not what is going to happen. I think she saw the value and the popularity that I got when I opened the Pandora's box because of the foolish concept by Fitzgerald Hines and commissioners before me and after me who felt that law-abiding citizens should not get firearms. There was like 300 per annum. I put it to about 2,000. But in that 6,000, none was lost, stolen, or used for a crime. So we made sure that persons could get, but you had to do immense research, due diligence, speaking to your wife, getting the wife's approval, finances, psychometric testing. If that is not done, then you can open the Pandora's box again in another way that the wrong persons could get firearms. You could have negligent discharges, you can lose it, you can be intoxicated, you can attack your spouse with it. So what she said, it is expected that she will continue to the pattern that I did, which is it can't be more than about 1,000, 2,000 per annum. That's about 3 to 5 per day. Anytime you go more than that, the due diligence will then collapse and the wrong persons can get it. So it's not about any law-abiding citizen. We have to be very vigilant to make sure the right persons get it, whilst at the same time not going back to the Fitzgerald Hines attitude that only it seems that it's okay for criminals to have firearms, but not law-abiding citizens.
Gary, as always, sincere thanks, and we will touch base soon. Keep us in the loop, of course. Once we see developments, we always, get a chance to ventilate and express ourselves here on the show. All the best, Gary. We'll touch base soon.
Take care. Bye.